Okay, we are starting our next unit. So this unit is officially entitled Interest Groups, Political Parties, and Mass Media. All right?
Wait, why are we learning about interest groups now? It was on our test yesterday.
Ooh.
He said that.
Because, well, I told you, like, political parties showed up on your test yesterday, too, because that's part of voting behavior, but it's one of those weird things as to how they organize this. Well, I mean, it doesn't help you in the slightest, but on the bright side, they're changing the organization of this class. 2018.
Oh, so just make us look bad.
So basically, the freshmen of this school will go through this class when it's a little bit better organized.
Me too. Everybody
So on the bright side, here's the deal. On the bright side, if you go through this and we go and take a test on the 27th, which is it's definitely the next 6 weeks, yeah. But it's like 2.5 weeks, something like that. And it's, believe it or not, it's not really that many days. We're only going to spend like nine days on this unit, I think. We're going to lose a day for our next FRQ. Okay, that's the 22nd. So on Wednesday, the 15th, which is our next Wednesday, you'll get your options again. You've got chapter 9, 10, and then 7. All right, and so those are listed up there. The dates are up there. Obviously, that's on the calendar already. This is not on your calendar, but you should pay attention. All right, the 24th will be your next vocab quiz. It'll be chapters 7, 9, and 10. Those are the 3 chapters that technically fall into this. Again, one of them's interest group, one of them's parties, one of them's mass media. Okay? Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea when the next project is going to start? Like the cases one you did?
So your congressional legislation is due. When is it due? I want to say it's due the Friday before spring break.
What is that?
It's an assignment you haven't been given yet. Basically, it's your next project grade. Okay, you're going to write your own piece of legislation.
Oh, wow.
Right? And this is one of the great things about this class, right? Can you mess this up?
No.
You can literally write your legislation about whatever you want. You could write legislation to create a new national holiday called Coach Baker Day. Okay? Don't do that. But I mean, literally, legislation, and you might be surprised to hear that, right? But that's actually a relatively common thing in Congress. Okay? In fact, a couple of years ago, when the Republicans and Democrats were really at each other's throats and they couldn't get anything done, and the Republicans kept shutting Congress down because they didn't like Obamacare, right? If you went through that entire year, Congress only passed like something like 68 bills, somewhere around there. And that might sound like a lot to you, but like 53 of them renamed post offices. Post office? Post offices? Post offices? Okay. What? Why do they rename them so many times? I don't know, to make people feel better about themselves. Because of, you have, I guess you have to do stuff like that from time to time. I mean, like every city in America has a Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard these days, right? Which is always sad too, because they put it in like the worst area of town too.
Where's ours?
Ours is like ours is like in the worst area.
Is
Martin Luther King is like that street or whatever. It's like in the worst area of town.
what town are you referring to though? Houston?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just saying. When I said like every town, I meant big town. Although Chapel Hill has a Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. That's not a deal. Okay. So listen, interest groups. The definition of an interest group is basically an organization, okay, where people are coming together in order to try to influence government. All right. This shouldn't come as a shock to you. The whole basic premise behind this is that it's a group, And obviously you can get more done in a group than what you can get done individually, right? So if you individually write Donald Trump and you're like, hey, I think you should stop doing this, right? He doesn't care. Right? If you write Pete Olson individually and you're like, hey, I'd like you to do this, he's not going to listen. Okay? And it's not like a bad thing that he doesn't listen. It would be that it's not possible, it's not feasible for that to happen. I mean, even at a representative level, I mean, obviously let's throw the President of the United States out of it. He's got to deal with 330 million people, right? But even Pete Olson is dealing with, I don't know, what, a couple million? Maybe? Like what, I don't know what Pete Olson represents. But it's probably around about 1 million people, I would guess. Right? And so there's no way that he can take into account what all 1 million people want. Alright? Now when we go back, we read Federalist number 10 a long time ago, right? Madison's little dilemma here. This is part of what he's talking about. Interest groups count as political factions. In fact, the term interest group is really almost an all-encompassing term. You could actually throw the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in as an interest group. Do they have an interest? Yes. Are they trying to influence government? Yes. That's the definition of an interest group right there. A group of people trying to influence government. All right? So this all goes back to Madison's little dilemma, right? How to keep both freedom and order, okay? Because theoretically these groups could sort of shut the government down. They could grind everything to a halt. They could actually cause real problems in our order. But if you don't let people join groups, now you're denying them an essential freedom. So that's the issue. The belief is, or the hope is at least, that the pluralist theory or pluralism will actually hold true. You'll have enough groups that they have to work with one another and they have to compromise and then ultimately do what is in the best interest of the United States. All right? And so that's the theory there. And just so you understand, this, like interest groups, okay, this is where massive funds come into government, into campaigning, into things like that. All right? So, if you look, this is the amount of money spent just to lobby the state government of California.
I wish I could have a chunk of that.
Okay? So you're spending, and again, this is like 1995, 96. Right? So you're talking 20 years ago just lobbying the state of California and companies, because that's who creates interest groups primarily, okay, are spending close to $300 million trying to get California to create policies that are beneficial to their individual company. All right? Now, some of the reasons for the growth of interest groups. One, and I don't make kids read Tocqueville anymore. He was a French guy who came over here around about the time of the American Revolution and basically was like a sociologist. He basically just wandered around and looked at Americans and kind of sized them up and determined how they functioned as people. And one of the things that he thought is that Americans were sort of this social entity that really hadn't existed in the world prior to this point, right? That Americans group themselves together, they want to be a part of groups, and so there's probably an aspect of that in terms of our sort of social conditioning that leads us to wanting to join groups. Most of us are, maybe sadly, most Americans are not really comfortable sort of sitting by themselves in silence, right? All right, and I'm sure there's all kinds of like psychological things that we could delve into with that, but obviously this is not a psych class, so not happening. All right, there are economic reasons. Okay? In fact, when you look at it, money is one of the major things that makes the world go round. All right, so we should remember the Grange from APUSH last year. Okay? This is the the organization that's created with the populist movement and trying to ensure in the late 19th century that the farmers are not missing out on all of the economic prosperity of the industrial age. Do we remember that from A-Push? Maybe? Okay, so, so economic developments is a reason. Okay, government policies is a reason. In fact, every time the government creates a new organization, a new agency, that's one more sort of door for lobbyists to try to go through. Okay, so as the U.S. government has continued to increase in size over the scope of the 240 years of American history or whatever it's been now, and that causes these sort of avenues or these opportunities for groups to go in and start talking to people who actually influence policy. All right, and then additionally, or finally here, the last one we got on this page is the diversity of population. All right, so the more people that you have, the more diverse your people are. All right, they have varying wants and needs, and so they're going to group themselves together in order to promote those. All right, these are just some of the, and I forget how old this chart is now, but some of the varying groups of lobbyists. All right, the diffusion of power in government is another reason. Again, this goes back to that opening or creating new agencies. So as you create new agencies, you get new avenues, right, for groups to go in and begin to lobby new organizations that just popped up. When you diffuse power in government, sort of the same thing, all right? So as you share power, or as power is pulled apart, again, that affords interest groups that opportunity to go and sort of pick up specific little people or agencies within government that they can try to influence to enact policies that are beneficial to whatever their interest group is. All right. Political parties have become weaker and weaker over time. We've talked about that. More and more Americans are no longer joining political parties. Okay. Even when you, how many 18-year-olds in this room? 18? Okay. If you've already registered to vote, you might have joined a political party, right? Does that really mean anything? Did you give them money? No. Did you go and help them campaign? No. All right? And we'll get to that in a minute and sort of what joining a group means, all right? But political parties don't hold the power that they used to, okay? And so when that happens, again, there's another opportunity for private interest groups to sort of come in and fill that void and be able to get things done. All right? Additionally, with our campaign finance reform and things like that, we have afforded the opportunity for interest groups to grow, okay, and be able to raise money and then utilize that money via free speech, right, to lobby. All right. Additional reasons for growth. I told you that you might have picked up on this. What's the biggest interest group?
Energy and natural resources.
Business. I mean, if you classify it in its largest sort of form, individual corporations are the ones that create PACs, and it's on or create interest groups, because PACs are an interest group. Okay, and so it's on a later slide, but you'll find that businesses are the ones that are most commonly doing that. All right, once you begin in the 60s and the 70s, and I forget the name of the book now, but there was basically a book that's the equivalent of The Jungle to like the environmental movement, right? Sounds like it might be right. Okay? Like I said, I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head. So what happens is that government begins to start regulating industry we become a lot more sort of activist in terms of what we're doing and how we're implementing policy from a governmental level. That creates or requires some sort of response by business, because obviously, I don't know where Obama came up with the idea, right? But if you remember about 8 years ago or 6 years ago, they were running around talking about clean coal, right? Clean coal. There's no such thing. Doesn't exist. Coal is dirt. It's messy. Okay? It causes a lot of pollution. Right? But when the government comes in and starts regulating all of these different aspects, then all of a sudden business has to respond to it, because they need people to ensure that they don't create so many regulations that an industry like coal would cease to exist. Right? Because that was a real legitimate fear, especially in places like Kentucky and West Virginia that are so heavily dependent upon the coal industry, that if Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton had won the last election, because everybody knows Bernie's obviously an environmental activist, right? But I mean, Clinton went into West Virginia and told West Virginians she was going to shut down all coal mines, right? Which is like the dumbest thing a politician can ever say in the state of West Virginia, because I guarantee you will get no votes in West Virginia if you walk into West Virginia and be like, hey, you know that one job that you have in the state? We're going to stop it. Good luck, y'all already live in poverty. Okay? So, business has to respond, all right? This is where it begins to get a little ridiculous and it starts to snowball out of control, right? Because now, once you have interest groups that are created that are going to go out and like lobby government to say, hey, stop having, restrictions against the coal industry, then you get other interest groups that jump up and are formed in order to fight the interest group that's trying to do something. Okay, so then you have interest groups that are being created in order to compete with already existing interest groups. Which obviously you see snowballs, and all of a sudden you're creating a third or fourth or fifth interest group, all in competition with one another. Alright, so we'll go through our types of interest groups here quickly. Alright, your traditional interest groups are economic in nature. Like I said, this is what you're talking about in terms of business. Okay, and I mean obviously this breaks it down into agricultural, labor, business, but obviously farming is a business, right? You might like farming, you might like being out on a farm, but ultimately you don't do it just for fun, right? You do it to make money, okay? So our traditional interest groups are interest groups that are economic in nature, okay? And so it's primarily business, and then the last one down there, professional. AMA is the American Medical Association, so doctors, but obviously, again, still business, right? Then you have non-traditional, or what we call protest interest groups. Okay, for a lot of you, these will be easy to understand. The NAACP counts as a protest interest group, right? We understand what the NAACP is, right? The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, right? It is an organization that collects money, that has members who give money to it, right, in order to do a wide variety of things, right? And by the 1940s, right, they really create their sort of legal wing, where the NAACP challenges things like Brown versus Board of Education in the courts, and they do a lot of things in that regard, all right? But so these are examples of interest groups that are trying to get the government to do something that tend to be a little bit more protest-based, right? So we're protesting or we're trying to change some sort of policy that already exists, all right? Next, we have single-issue groups, all right? So MAD is always a good example, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the National Rifle Association. Is NORML the marijuana one?
Wait, why is there a thing that's called Mothers Against Drunk Driving?
Because your mom doesn't want you to drive drunk, buddy.
Well, yeah, like, no, duh. My mom doesn't want me to play with a gun either.
Oh, okay,
That's
well,
like an obvious thing.
maybe your mom can go start that interest group.
I guess.
Well, but here's the thing, all right? And I mean, I hate to tell you this, but statistically, almost half of this room at some point in time will drive drunk.
Not yet. Mr. Baker, have you ever drove drunk?
I'm not gonna answer that question.
I promise I'm not gonna tire.
I'm not gonna answer that question. But look, the truth of the matter is there's, for a lot of people, there is an instance where, and I'm not saying like can't see straight. I think there's 3 Christians sitting there, I'm still gonna get behind the wheel of a car. Okay? But I mean, maybe you go out and you have 2 or 3 drinks, but you didn't eat quite enough that day, and so you're just at that limit or maybe slightly impaired. Okay? Those things can still have catastrophic consequences, and so there are organizations that are trying to promote awareness about it, right? There are, I mean, MAD is like an interest group. It doesn't just lobby the government. I mean, they go around to like high schools, to colleges, right? When I was at UNC, there was literally a huge video game that had a real car steering wheel and like multiple cameras, and it showed you what it was like to drive drunk. And I mean, I'm a very, very good driver. I was 27 or whatever at this point. No, I couldn't have been that old. I've been like 25. But I got in that thing, right? And they would tell you like your blood alcohol was 0.02. I could drive fine, right? By the time it got to like 0.08, which is the legal limit, that I was driving through somebody's front lawn.
Wait, you're actually, like, they would, like, give you more alcohol as
Yeah, because it changes your reaction time, and I'm telling you, like, turning that wheel, because the wheel doesn't respond, because it messes with your mind, like, that's what alcohol does. And so, all of a sudden, like, I'm turning, the car didn't move, so I'm turning more. The next thing you know, I'm on somebody's front lawn, and I can't.
Wait, you weren't actually drunk.
No, this is a video game, this is a video game.
Oh, does it put you, like, in a
No. No. It's like you're sitting. It's in our student union, and so you're sitting basically in a video game.
So it was like artificial.
No, Jesus, no. Oh my Lord, that would be terrible.
Just like a stop sign, like, take a shot, and then like.
No.
Okay, my defense, I knew you were in a simulation. I just thought they were actually giving you alcohol as because like as a college student, that'd be like nice. Something to do. It's like go drive around.
I will tell you right now, having sat through that, it absolutely does change your understanding of it. Right? And so that's, I mean, again, that's part of what interest groups will do. And I don't think that one specifically was MAD. But there are other sort of alcohol-related single issue interest groups. Oh, sorry. Then finally, public interest here. Okay, these are interest groups that claim to be sort of trying to help society as a whole. Some of these you could sort of, they're a little bit argumentative, right? Part of it goes into sort of what their policies are. Part of it is how they self-identify. What? What?
High school.
No story.
Run through the line, you get.
You don't get like a medal if you get like 60 miles?
No, this and here's the thing. This is why they don't bring a game like that to high schools.
Probably so far.
Because Will Jenkins would sit there and be like, dude, make it 2.0 and let's see how many people I can run over. Okay? Which is not remotely appropriate. Okay? Especially if you've ever had a friend who has been in a drunk driving accident, or thank God nothing happened to my little sister, but one year around Christmas she was driving 4:30 in the afternoon, and a car went through a median and hit the backside of her truck. Right? But I mean literally like jumped over, so I'm in California, like, well you have them out here in some places, right? They have like the little grassy area in between the 2 lanes.
Like an avenue? Like, you know the piece of concrete with like grass on it? Yeah.
Yeah, a car went over that and ran into my sister at like 4:30 in the afternoon because the guy was wasted. So, trust me, you wouldn't make a joke of it at that point.
Sounds like your sister ruined his day.
Okay, he's
She was okay, right?
just said
Yes, she was fine.
How long ago was this?
Oh, this
Well, he's like,
was years ago.
so it's okay to make a joke?
How you gonna ask
to me
him
the
okay
next
after
day,
you
like,
make
oh my god.
You weren't drunk. Wow.
I got kicked in the airbag.
Probably deserve to be hit in the face regularly.
Still.
Ideological groups, again, these should be relatively easy for you to understand, right? Like the Christian Coalition. A lot of these ideological groups you tend to think of as more sort of right-winged groups. A lot of ideological interest groups follow sort of religious tracks. The ACLU, though, sometimes gets classified here as ideological. Sometimes it also gets classified as protest, though. With American Civil Liberties Union, that's what the ACLU is. It's basically like, honestly, and I don't mean this to be racist, the ACLU is basically like the NAACP, except for everybody. Right? I mean, that's really what it is. Okay? The NAACP is obviously looking specifically at black people. Okay? And then, believe it or not, you have governmental interest groups. Okay? In fact, one of the largest interest groups, right, or lobbying entities today is actually it's like the United Municipal and City and County Workers of the U.S. or something, right? And then again, PACs get covered in this. We'll cover PACs a little bit later. And last thing here, because this is real quick. Why do people join interest groups?
It can make their voice heard over other people.
Okay, so one is to make your voice heard. Okay, although ironically, then sometimes there's really not a reason to join because what's the point, right? If I don't join the ACLU, are they still going to be able to fight for civil liberties?
Yes.
Yeah, my voice doesn't matter there, right? And I'm, no jokes, I'm nowhere close to joining this organization, okay? But when I get old, if I want to join the AARP, okay, which like your grandparents might be a part of, and again, does my membership into the AARP, does that really do any good? Does it help the AARP? Does it make a huge difference for them? My little probably like $25 annual membership? Not really. Okay? But there are a lot of people, my dad was one, who joined the AARP because, God love my father, he's a little cheap. And the AARP gets you discounts on all kinds of things. Right? So his little AARP membership got him discounts on like his car insurance, like hotel stays, like all kinds of stuff.
Why
Right.
wouldn't you join?
What?
Why wouldn't you join? I'm gonna join that as soon as I can.
One, Will, you have to be 55 years old to join.
Okay, when I'm 55, I'm signing up for it.
That's why I said I'm nowhere near joining it. Thanks, Will. Not close to 55 years old.
I didn't know it was
Okay? But what I just explained to you is this is what we call the free rider problem, right? So a free rider is somebody like my dad who joined AARP with no intention of actually being active in that organization. He just wanted his discounts, right? And so with the free riders, there's various types of incentives. Even without including the free riders in this, there are other types of incentives as well, all right? So when you join, you get like solidarity benefits down there at the bottom, right? Because, you know, when Will's like 55 years old and his wife's left him and his kids don't talk to him anymore, he probably is going to want to join the AARP so he can have somebody to tell his same like 25 stories to over and over and over and over again, because that's what old people do, right?
Whoa.
I'm kidding, Will. You'll probably be on your second wife at that point. Okay. Other types of incentives, you do get material benefits sometimes, right? Whether it's a newsletter, mug, coffee, mug, t-shirt, whatever. All right. And then purposive benefits, right? Or benefits that basically make you feel good about yourself because, you know, you're helping out a good thing. Okay. So if you go and you give money to the ACLU, for instance, maybe the ACLU doesn't help me specifically, but if I know that it does go and help somebody else, right, or like Project Innocence or something like that, and those are some of those types of benefits. All right, we'll go over tactics of interest groups at a later point. We're going to stop there. And I know the internet sucks in here, but do your best. Okay, which means that if you need to work together, or in all honesty, if somebody just wants to come up to the presentation computer here and type these in, I really don't have an issue with that. So, how old are you? No, that's a demographic question. I was not asking. I don't. God love you, I don't care. Right? What is your gender? That's demographics. Okay? It's the way we organize information. Are you gonna be in charge for me?